about the possibility of a long war in Ukraine. So the Russo-Ukrainian war broke out the 24th of February this year, and in a sense, it's already been going on for 8 years in eastern Ukraine, in the Luhansk and Donetsk districts, collectively known as the Don River Basin or Donbass. And Russia obviously seized Crimea more or less bloodlessly in 2014. So it's going on for 8 years. It could easily go on for another 8 years. Putin thought his Specjalnaya Voyennaya Operatio would be over in 3 days because only 72 hours after his illegal act of unprovoked aggression, he issued a press statement saying, "This is it, we've won, and then we're reuniting Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus." And that was very quickly withdrawn because that communique seems so farcical now. Ignominious defeats for Russia, but they've had some victories too. So they're obviously clearly not going to blitzkrieg. The Russian army's never been good at moving fast. The only time they did it was in Manchuria against the Japanese in August 1945, where they had supposedly an element of surprise. They'd completely intact roads, railways, bridges, battle-hardened troops that got everything ready. But usually very, very slow, very heavily reliant on artillery. Remember Stalin, whom Putin praises to the moon. Stalin said that artillery is the god of war. And there was something in that because most casualties in war are inflicted by artillery. Otherwise, other cruiser weapons or planes. Relatively few inflicted by small arms or grenades. Anyhow, so Russia is slowing down because the losses have been significant. It's thought at least 20,000 dead. So you can multiply by that 3 for the wounded. But what's wounded? If you shed a single drop of blood, you're wounded. But you're not even going to notice. You can carry on fighting. Right to the other end of the spectrum, which is you're a quadruple amputee or something like that, or you're virtually dead. Okay, you're just a vegetable in a bed or something. So can never fight, never contribute to the war effort, and there's everything in between. And not so many have been captured. But anyway, they've sustained significant losses, and they're having trouble replacing them. Getting people from prison to volunteer in return from release, conscripting people, particularly poor boys from the most remote regions with very few economic opportunities. But they may run out of these. Versus this, there are more deaths than births. There's populations falling like a stone, falling by 300,000 each year. A lot of Central Asian guest workers were laid off in 2020 and still haven't returned to Russia, just haven't got their jobs back. And as the economy is shrinking, they're never going to get those jobs back. So he's facing all sorts of headaches. There are fewer young men around who are called up for compulsory military service each year. So he can't always just pick on the socially marginal, the poor, the ethnic minorities. He's going to have to conscript more ethnic majority people and maybe even some middle class people. Only 12% of Russians are middle class by Western economic standards. He might even be a doctor in Russia and have a working class income by Western standards. So that's going to be a increasing headache for him. He might get some Belarusians to volunteer. He might get some Tajiks or whatever, people from the poorer Central Asian republics to come and volunteer because they're so desperate. Because economic situation is so dire in their country because their economies are so enmeshed with that of Russia. But there was also a shortage of equipment because there have been several thousand heavy ticket items like tanks, artillery pieces, or whatever destroyed. Obviously, Russia can manufacture more, but it can't produce at anything like the rate they've been destroyed. Purchase more? Well, that's difficult. Not many countries are willing to sell them to Russia and incur the wrath of NATO and the European Union, and Russia cannot afford them that well. Okay, Russia's made quite a lot of money out of oil and gas because the price is sky high, but Western countries are increasingly going away. Russia's just lost coal, the coal market in Germany. Germany's not going to buy that coal again. Germany's going to phase out their oil December this year and gas in a few years, and all other European Union countries are going to follow suit by 2030. Even if it doesn't quite happen, they're certainly going to reduce the amount of oil and gas they purchase from Russia, and everything else already stopped buying Russian gold. So economy is going to shrink about 12% this year, a few percentage points next year, and a few percentage points the year after that. Where's Russia going to be in 10 years' time compared to where it was before the war? The economy is going to be significantly smaller, like 25% smaller at least. The population is going to be a bit smaller And the people are leaving are those you can ill afford to lose. There's going to be a brain drain. The most highly educated, talented people like IT specialists are leaving, just the kind of people Putin needs to build his sovereign internet. He's envious of the Great Firewall of China. So he's got a lot of problems. And for 20 years, the Russian working class had a decent standard of living. I won't say a good one, but that's gone now, and they're going to be pushed into poverty. Not starving, but they'll really have no disposable income. Even a holiday by the Black Sea is just going to be unthinkable for most of them. So, Russia's going back economically, like over 30 years. And the ruble's actually too high. The measure to support the ruble's actually been over successful. So Russia's going to have difficulty sustaining it. A lot of the components they need, electronics, transponders, other things like microchips for more sophisticated weaponry, guided missiles, mob bombs, planes. They can't get those from Western countries. They can get the ersatz Chinese equivalents. We're not sure how well they're going to work. So they can sustain it, but with great difficulty, with not so much technology, with dumb bombs. So their artillery is only accurate to within 500 meters. These Western HIMARS are accurate to within 1 meter. So it's kill whatever it's supposed to kill. If you're 1 meter out, I mean, that makes no difference because it's going to destroy everything within, say, 50 meters of where it lands. So now Ukraine is obviously suffering heavy losses a day, like at least 100 deaths, and their population's not even a third of that of Russia. How is Russia oil getting to new markets at a discount? What's your opinion on it? Should the EU and other countries sanctioned continue those countries buying Russian oil? I mean, that might be too far. Countries have a right to buy Russian oil. Obviously, some of it is going to China, but the pipeline there is at capacity. They can't send any more. You can obviously ship some to China, but even then, there's only so many oil tankers, and those harbors can only take so many ships a day. Also to India. The problem is, and they're already having to sell at a serious discount to India and China. Because the problem is Russia can't sell any more at the moment because there are not enough pipelines going there. Their pipelines for oil and gas are mostly to the European Union. Now you can build gas pipelines and oil pipelines to China and Russia, as China and India, apart from the addition of the existing ones to China. But that's going to take time. You can't do that overnight. It's going to take several years. And even the Indians and Chinese are concerned about climate change and pollution. So they too are moving towards green energy, admittedly slowly because they can't really afford to. So Russia may have lost a customer in the long term in Western countries. They don't want to support Russia's aggression financially, and they don't want to have themselves over a barrel in case Russia were to choose to cut off oil and gas. And they're already doing it. Russia's showing itself to be a very unreliable supplier, sending any gas to Germany through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline under the Baltic Sea. And they say, oh, routine maintenance. They always say there's technical issues since the Berlin blockade, which is simply going to push the European Union to move even faster towards green energy. Obviously, it can't be done overnight. It's going to take several years, but there's every incentive to do so. As oil and gas prices are extremely high, then renewable energy is not more expensive than that. So might as well go for the wind energy, the solar power, biomass, whatever else it is, and just minimize energy usage. Turn the thermostat out of winter, wear a woolly jumper, drive as little as you can, fly as little as you can, not purchase items, work from home, and things like that. So yeah, Russia can sustain this long term, but it's going to be difficult, and they won't have the big advantages in armor and in artillery that they have now. They'll be able to produce fewer tanks and artillery pieces. Lower quality is going to cost them relatively more. Because their economy is going to be that much smaller. They're going to have fewer troops. It's going to become more unpopular. 70% of Russians supported the war, according to an opinion poll a few months ago. Not to say 30% were against, some were neutral. How much can we trust that poll? It's difficult to say. There's no free media in Russia. Whether there's wall-to-wall propaganda, 360-degree propaganda on the street, on posters, on television, on the radio, on the internet, in school, everywhere, propagandizing for the war. So obviously they told the truth, that figure would be much, much lower. Anyway, but that figure has now fallen to 55%. Reality, you might think it's a bit lower than that. Like James Ramsey MacDonald said, no war is at first unpopular. So, the Russians have a few successes, but they're beginning to pay a price. They're feeling the pain in terms of the death toll and in terms of the economic cost of that, which is only going to mount, which doesn't guarantee they might lose, they might win in the end. Putin reckons that his people's will to suffer is greater than in Western countries. He may well be right. Western countries quite soft, quite pampered, had a quite pretty good life for a long time, care about the living standards, have a 5-minute attention span. Who cares about the Ukrainians? Will eventually get fed up of high oil and gas prices and will get weary of accommodating Ukrainian refugees. So he's waiting for Western unity to fracture, and it's already fraying. So yeah, Russia can keep this up, but it won't have such a big edge as it does at the moment. That's going to be increasingly blunted as the Ukrainians are getting more weapons. We've already seen it. What the West needs to do for the Ukrainians to win is just ship those kinds of weapons in huge quantities. Even 8 HIMARS were making a small difference. What if they had hundreds of them? What if they had 300 like that, 300 like they wanted? Then the Ukrainians would win. So this is very doable. About 500 HIMARS in the world, almost all in NATO hands. You can always make more, and you have to take a bit of a gamble that there's not going to be a third world war in the next year, and that the Western countries are not going to need them. I mean, even if they do, well, at least Ukraine is a Western ally. Ukraine has them. You've not lost them to NATO in a sense. Right, thank you so much for watching. Please donate to me on PayPal, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. Toodle pip.